as part of trying to push out from sports and work on other things, taking portraits, taking editorial and environmental portraits, especially trying to light those and come up with a unique and creative idea. That's kind of where I run into trouble, posing and just coming up with an idea of what I want to see. I know what I like when I see it, but trying to come up with it and create it out of nothing is definitely one of the bigger challenges that I face.
Hey, welcome back to the Beginner Photography Podcast, brought to you by CloudSpot, the all-in-one solution to deliver and sell your photos online. I am your host, Raymond Hatfield, and I'm back with another Community Spotlight interview. These Community Spotlight interviews are my opportunity to interview you, a member of the Beginner Photography Podcast community, to learn more about you, your struggles, and why you love this crazy thing that we do, photography. Now, today I am interviewing Ryan Coody. Now, Ryan is not a beginner per se. He's been shooting for a number of years, but he's been in the group for a long time and has been incredibly thoughtful with his answers when helping out others. And as you'll hear in this interview, he really does a great job explaining photography in a way that everybody can understand and relate to. So with that, this is kind of a long one. We're going to go ahead and get on into this interview with Ryan Coody. Ryan, my first question for you is, I just want to know, when did you know that photography was going to play an important role in your life?
It's a great question. And as you mentioned, I listened to the podcast, so I knew it was coming. And I still don't know if I'm ready for it.
Now I wish I threw you a curveball, but okay, we'll go with it.
I've flirted around with photography numerous times throughout my life, as probably many people have. The first time I would say that I knew it was going to be serious was my second try at college. I went into this second round. It's kind of part of the story, but I went into this second try at college a little more serious than the first time because that didn't work out very well. But joining all the groups, joining all the clubs, getting really involved and engaged in just the community. And as part of that, I joined the college newspaper. And so within the newspaper, I started writing articles because we got paid for it. And I found out you made more money if you sent a photo in to go with the article. It was a lot of writing for a couple dollars and then like $5 for a photo that took up the same space. So I was like, let's just do pictures. That's way better.
I think that's the only time photographers have been paid more than other staff on the team. So that's good.
It was weird. Yeah, it was weird. Of course, they're probably just using AI to fill it out now. But so in order to do that, I didn't have a camera. I borrowed, I want to say it was probably like a Nikon, like a D3000 that they had, kind of like the staff camera that we all shared. So I took that out and kind of figured out how to use it again, because at this point it's digital and I hadn't had any sort of SLR type format in general. So I had to learn how to use it again, and it was just straight auto at that point, like nothing crazy. I was happy just to get it onto the card. Doing that for articles, and then I realized, I kind of remember like I wanted to do this. This is kind of fun. I don't know what really I need to do to jump into it, but I decided first off was to get a camera.
It's a good first step.
I managed to get a scholarship there at school. It was not a big thing, but extra cash. And so I took that, and everybody else was heading downtown. And I took it over to Target and bought a D3100 with the little kit that came with it, with that lens. And it was, what was it, like the 16 to 55, I think, and the 55 to 200. So I went ahead and got the extra reach on there, even though
you're feeling good at that point.
Just the kit lens. Yeah, it was great. So I spent the next however long still in auto and just trying to find a reason to take photos. I took pictures of everything, the sidewalk, the sky, dandelions, whatever. But I really wanted to take pictures of people, but I wasn't comfortable at that point calling myself a photographer, as many other people have mentioned. And so I wasn't ready to come out and say, hey, I'm doing this thing now. Let me take your picture. I was very, very shy, very reserved. But I found that if I had a reason to take photos, if I had an assignment either for the paper or for something else, then I could kind of get over my own anxiety in that regard. And so I stuck with the paper and just said, hey, if you need somebody to cover games, I could do that, to work my way into having a reason to go photograph the games, because I knew if I wanted to photograph people, I could go to the games, because those people didn't care. I didn't have to ask them to pose. I didn't have to ask them to do anything. They were just already doing something that was interesting. So I just went in and shot every game that I could that was there at the college. So basketball, volleyball, softball, football, all the basic sports, and just kind of learned through that. And so that was probably a really long way to answer that question. But that's kind of where it started for me.
So at some point you start showing up to more games and you want to photograph more. At what point did you get off of auto, or at what point did you realize, did you feel that you were being held back, or why move on past auto?
Yeah. So it was, I don't remember any specific point, but just knowing in general that I wanted the best that I could get. I wanted better, whatever better looked like. And so I'm watching YouTube, trying to learn, and I'm seeing what other photographers are doing and trying to figure out what they're doing differently than what I'm doing to get these nice blurry backgrounds. And their athletes are in focus. Mine are just blobs, and deciding I want that. How did they get there? And just trying to steal that information from anywhere I could get.
So finding these photographers, they say that, I'm assuming manual is the way to go. Is that what they said? And that's when you started to look deeper into it?
Yeah, trying to learn manual. And I'd heard about this crazy f-stop thing at one point before, but I didn't know what that even meant. But learning how to use manual and then finding out, this is when I found out that different lenses do different things other than just make the image further or closer. Mm-hmm. That hadn't occurred to me before. And then finding out that those lenses were more expensive than the whole kit that I just bought.
Right. Oh, that's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. I still remember vividly looking at the price of a 70 to 200 and my camera, and I bought 2 extra lenses that weren't kit lenses. They were bona fide lenses, and that 70 to 200 was twice the price of my entire kit. And I thought, how does anybody afford this? This is wild. But yeah, There's so much that goes into it. So I'm assuming now, tell me where you're at today in your journey then.
Yeah, that's an even better question. Right now, I photograph a lot of games still. I primarily hang out in the sports area. I do some editorial work as well, and I'm trying to move on from sports to try and find new challenges. I would never say that I've maxed out any potential in anything, but I've gotten most of the way in the sports field where I want it to be as far as my own work goes, and as far as moving in a direction where I can get away from the typical corporate 9-to-5 thing and try to make photography my full-time work as so many others want to do. Sports isn't necessarily the easiest way to do that for a variety of reasons. Let's see.
Are you still working for the paper?
I don't. I left them behind when I got out of college a few years back.
Yeah, right. So
highlighting all my gray hair.
I got a few too. For me, it was the kids. The kids have definitely brought on the gray hairs. So are you shooting for yourself, or who are you shooting these games for?
So I spend most of my time photographing for an outlet called Indian Sports. It's an outlet that covers primarily Native American athletes throughout high school, college, and professional careers and beyond. There's a lot more of, say them, us. I'm also Native American, Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, if anybody's interested. And that ties into the college I went to as well. But we go around and particularly being based in Kansas City, a lot of these teams come through the Midwest area. So we go out and cover them as much as we can as a way to highlight them, not only within the Native American communities at home, to show those other kids that these kids are making it. These guys are going D1 and professional level sports, but to also highlight that out into the mainstream world to say, yeah, these athletes you like watching, yeah, that guy's a Native American guy. That's pretty cool, huh?
That is cool.
And so, yeah, that's where I spend most of my time these days is working with that.
Okay, we're definitely going to go deeper into that. But before we go in there, I want to backtrack and learn more about kind of the journey that you had into learning the technical side of photography, because I know a lot of people are kind of stuck in that gear right now. So when it came time for you to learn manual mode or just the more advanced features of your camera, what would you say that you struggled with most?
Aperture, I feel like, is probably out of the triangle, is figuring aperture out and how it all works together. And the problem a lot of folks run into, and I see this in sports photography groups as well, because I don't want to just keep harping on sports, but it's one of those areas, along with weddings and events and concerts, where you're really going to max out the potential of what your camera and your lens can do pretty quick if you're trying to grow in terms of like ISO capability and getting the widest aperture that you can in order to keep that down. As far as getting there, I mentioned watching others and trying to figure out what they do, and everybody's talking about this 70 to 200 2.8, 70 to 200. You got to have a 70 to 200. Whatever you're doing, get that lens. And so I'm reading that everywhere, and I thought, well, that must be the thing to do. So I save up, and I bought a Sigma 70 to 200 because I couldn't afford the Nikon one. And
so much more expensive.
It's nice. And there was a difference, but the Sigma was good enough. I had images published from I think I moved up to a D600 once I learned the difference between crop sensor and full frame. And so, I had images published with the D600 and that Sigma 70 to 200 lens. So it's not all about the gear, but it's kind of about the gear.
Right. And that's a hard thing, I think, to understand for so many people.
Yeah, you just got to walk, you don't need to sell the house and buy all these lenses, but at some point you will hit that limit where your gear is holding you back, but it's important to not try to make that jump too early.
Right. Did you find that the
you'll
70
end up
to
with
200
stuff that you don't need?
I'm sorry, go on.
I was saying you'll end up with things that you don't need, and I have a closet full of stuff I don't need still.
Yeah,
but.
Even going slow, I got closets full of stuff that I'm like, why did I even buy this? This is ridiculous. Yeah, no, I totally get that. Did you find that getting that 70 to 200, was all of your dreams come true, or did you hit a wall with that as well?
Yeah, that was a big game changer, because then I could actually try it out. I could put the camera over in manual, and I could set the aperture, and I had so much more range to play with it and see what it did to the images, and see, okay, down at 2.8, wow, it kind of blurs out the background a little bit. That made the image way too bright. So how do I fix that? Because I like the blurry background, but now the image is too bright. So what other dial do I need to turn to fix that? And so just playing with it a lot on my own, and I don't mean to minimize that at all. That took me months to figure that out. And I really didn't even figure that out entirely. I ended up buying a Sigma. This is part of my journey on buying things I probably didn't need. But bought a Sigma 85 1.4 because I saw a photographer on YouTube that was taking amazing pictures with this. And I thought, I need that. So I saved up and I got that. And that's a beautiful lens. Don't get me wrong. That's an amazing lens. And I used that thing until it broke. But that one was, I could drop down to 1.4 and I could still remember where I was at when I figured that part out. If I put that at 1.4, well, that's when it really became obvious what aperture is doing. Mm-hmm. So having that helps me to get that concept down. Just for me, I'm not in any way saying that that's a necessary part of anybody's journey. I probably should have figured it out way before then, but.
Well, I think it's a lot harder with sports because everybody's just so much further away that you can't really see. There's not as much definition between somebody who's in focus and then the background being out of focus, just because that focal plane is so much further away than with that 85 1.4. If somebody is 3 feet away from you, their nose is going to be in focus, but their eyes are going to be out of focus, which is just wild to see. Did you find that you were using the 85 for sports?
Yeah, I use that thing all the time in basketball, and I've even reverted back to that today. I've now added an 85 back into my kit, and I struggle because I run out of shoulders to carry all this stuff on because I want all of them all the time. And but just the 85 looks amazing. It was, like you said, the focus issues were a huge challenge up until very recently, when eye detection and face tracking and detection got so good. It was really difficult to hit something at 1.4 that was sitting still, and if it's moving, then and for a long time I thought I was doing something wrong, and really that's a really hard shot to make. Now I'm way lazier than I used to be.
Because the camera's doing all the work?
Just follow them around.
Yeah. So I know I feel the same way when it comes to, I don't know why, maybe it's got to be just because of the name, but I feel like a lot of people, they'll say like, oh, I shoot in manual, but I still shoot in autofocus. And I'm like, me too. Like, they're not related. Like, autofocus is a must. Like, you are crazy if you're still shooting manual focus, unless, I don't know, maybe it's macro or something that needs very specific and it's hard for the camera, but rely on autofocus all day long.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I'm always curious about the sports though, because when I shoot weddings, people aren't moving that fast. It doesn't matter how fast you can run the 100 meters. But for sports, have you found that like autofocus is like, are we there? Are we at that point to where like it's great and your miss rate is less than 10, 15%?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Really?
And so I'm shooting on the R5 and the R6. So not even the R3, which you can look that thing up if anybody's not familiar. That thing's a beast.
Yeah.
I've never used it because I don't even want to entertain the idea
that now you have to buy a new camera. Yeah.
I'm perfectly content now. But these things are so amazing now that if you've got a compatible, like the manufacturer brand lens, like a Canon RF lens, just in my case, on the Canon R5 or R6, they don't miss. It's really, really nice. It's to the point now where you have too many, maybe not too many keepers, but you're now choosing between not necessarily which ones are in focus, but which ones are better images, which one has a better composition, which sports wise, like where is the ball in a better position in this shot or that shot? And it doesn't. It's also impacted by the fact that frame rates are so high these days.
Right.
You know, that D3100 I started with, I think it was maybe 3 frames a second. Mm-hmm. And now I think the minimum is 12 to 15. Anything less than that, people aren't even looking at it.
Which is so wild. That's like an entry-level camera.
Crazy.
Like 12 frames a second? Like, what are you doing? Yeah, it's so crazy. Do you feel like having all of this access to like amazing autofocus and like the crazy high drive speeds, do you feel like that gives you more of an appreciation for photographers who shot on film, or just makes you appreciate being alive right now more than anything?
I think both. I can't even imagine trying to do all of this 20 or 30 or longer than that years ago, when you're shooting on film, and especially for these wire service guys, you're shooting a couple rolls of film, you're like developing those things, you know, that night, sticking them in the mail, shipping them back. You don't even know what you got. You don't find out what your images look like until the magazine gets printed. I can't even imagine that life. There's probably people laughing at me right now, but
I know.
I grew up pre-digital. I just wasn't into photography back then.
Right. Did you shoot a lot of film, maybe when you were first getting started?
I shot some. My first ever camera that I bought on my own was a Canon. What was that thing? K something or other, just a basic SLR style camera. I didn't know you could take the lens off, so that
yeah, you're like, this
that
is
part
what the
didn't
camera
weigh into
is.
it all. But I bought that in my first round of college. I took needed a natural science credit class, so I picked out the easiest one that I could. It's called the Survey of the Plant Kingdom. I thought, yeah, that sounds super easy. I'll do that. So for that class, the professor, we only did one assignment the whole semester, and that was to go around and take photos of Arkansas and Ozark wildflowers. And so that's why I bought that camera. That didn't have any idea how to use it. I bought this thing, and it had its typical kit, like 18 to 55 kind of thing on there. And my first thought was, oh, great, I'm going to be able to get super zoomed in photos of these flowers for this class. Yeah, no, that didn't work that way. I didn't know why, but it just didn't work that way.
Yeah.
So that was really the only film I shot, and I'm taking that stuff to Walmart to develop,
Oh, yeah.
and
Chemicals are all out of temperature and wild, and you have no idea why they look like that. And
yeah.
It's funny. Go on.
I was just gonna say that's why I don't consider that to be my serious moment, because I was just snap shooting these things.
Yeah,
I had no idea what was going on.
I had my dad's Pentax K1000, and I still have it, but the light meter inside of it broke. But the issue that I always had with the K1000 is that, and maybe this is true for other film SLRs, that I just didn't have a huge range to draw from, but So the light would come in through the lens, it would hit the mirror, and then it would go up to the prism, and then you would see out of it. And I think since it was like from the 80s, over time, like some dust got in it, and like there were some coatings on the lenses that kind of, I don't want to say deteriorated, but seemed to shift colors. And therefore, you would lose like 2, maybe 3 stops of light. No, it was probably just 2 stops of light, like just looking through the viewfinder. So I cannot imagine, in my wildest dreams, like in a bright and sunny day, it was great. It was just fine. It didn't matter. You just looked at the light meter on the side, made sure that it was even, and then you were going to get some sort of good exposure. But I can't imagine if shooting with that thing any time past like 6 p.m. because you just couldn't see anything through the viewfinder at all. And there's no autofocus. So it's like to be able to see these photos from like old school sports photographers shooting in just terrible lighting conditions and still get it in focus and get that right moment blows my mind. I can't believe that it was ever done before. And recently you were telling me the story about, or in the group, the worst shooting conditions that you ever shot in. And you said that it was a sports game and half the lights in the stadium went out?
Yep. Half the lights. And it was already, all these high school football games started like 7:00. So it's already dark, even in the best conditions, because they don't play till like September, October. And halfway, I don't even know if it was halfway, and it's a small, like a 1 or 2 or 3A kind of school. So very, very small anyways. They didn't put a lot of money into lights.
Those lights are expensive. Those giant lights.
They are.
Oh my gosh.
They are. And if in many cases, most cases, I guess, what's good enough for your eyes as far as watching the game looks great, but put a camera in the equation and it just doesn't work. Mm-hmm. It just needs so much more than we do to be able to create that image. Yeah, halfway. So at some point in the game, the lights, not even on one end, but like if you're in the end zone looking across, like down the field, like the right side lights went out. And so so I had the full field, but only half of it.
Oh my gosh.
And as soon as that happened, I thought, well, that was fun. Guess I'll go home now.
Because it was just not enough to, like, what was the struggle? It was obviously, I'm sure, high ISO, but I would assume that your camera was having just the worst time ever trying to find focus.
Yeah, and I was trying to think about it when I was typing that up. I think that would have been when I was using, because it was a few more years into it after college and all that. So I think at the time I was using a Nikon D4. So not a slouch by any means. Yeah. A fine camera, and it just wasn't happening. Even on that light. 70 to 200 2.8, it was just muddy. And on that thing at the time, 3200 or 6400 ISO probably it was the max. Wow. And it was definitely above that. Yeah. And I'm shooting these because I'm still taking the photo, because overall, like, content is king, and a bad photo is better than no photo in some cases, but this is not one of those cases. No. And luckily I had got there early and hit the ground running and had photos from the warm-ups and the first half, and we were able to make that work. But
I do wonder sometimes, I know that at the end of the day, light is king, and if you have a good file, you're solid. But I wonder, with the advancements that Lightroom has made in terms of image processing, being able to add additional exposure as well as noise reduction, I wonder how much further you could take those images today. Do you still have the raw files?
That's actually a great question. I should look at that and see what I could do. I have Topaz, and then Lightroom's the newest update they just came out with their version of denoise.
Yeah.
I've tried them both. Those are both amazing. They come out with amazing results, stuff that a few years ago we couldn't even dream about. So that's actually a good question. I'm going to try that later. I'm going to pull those back up and see if I can save a few of them.
Well, you're going to have to share the results because I cannot wait to see those. And I remember...
The problem is they're probably way worse than even I'm thinking that they were.
Yeah, like you can remember the image in your head, but it's like the edited version where you already tried your best and it still looked like garbage. Yeah, no, I get that.
Exactly. It's probably terrible.
Yeah. I remember when I was in film school. So like thinking about it, this would have been 2007. And at the time, the Red camera had just came out and people were like, oh my God, this is going to change the industry. And shortly before I had graduated, Sony came out with an ad for their new cameras, which was just starting to take off. And the ad said something to the effect of like, so sensitive, you don't even need lights. And producers saw this and they were like, well, that's the camera that we're going to get. Like, lights are so expensive. Of course. Yeah, problem solved. And that painted them into a terrible corner because they would try to not rent lights for their DP to be able to shoot this thing. And every image, even though maybe it was technically exposed, was, I mean, just looked like mud. It was just garbage. Everything just kind of blended together because at the end of the day, even if you can see in those terrible lighting conditions, the quality of light is what really sets apart an image. So I can't imagine even today, if you could shoot it, okay, with your camera today, with the R5, the R6, whatever one is better. I would assume the R6, but I feel like not. I'm not too well versed in Canon anymore. Is that the case?
There's some contention over that. That's a hot topic in some Canon groups.
Okay.
Whether the R5 or the R6 has better ISO capability because the R6 has a smaller sensor versus the R5's larger sensor. But.
Okay, well, I'm not going to paint you into a corner, but if you had to pick your best performing low light camera and you were put in that same situation where half the lights went out, how much better do you think that the images would be better today, or do you think that they would just be more properly exposed?
That same situation, I definitely think you could do better. It would still probably be pretty nasty, but definitely more usable. And I probably could have shot longer throughout the evening because even with it actually might have made for some pretty neat images now that I think about it, because the lights being on one half of the field and not on the other half of the field could have made for some pretty dramatic looking light, whether having them backlit and sort of silhouette them against that or go on the other side and have a super dark background.
Yeah.
I kind of wish I'd have played with that. I wonder if they'll turn half the lights off for me.
Right. You could just ask next time, like, hey, can you guys do me a favor real quick?
But I just wasn't thinking about that kind of stuff back then.
Oh, well, yeah, no, not back then. Yeah. Every other parent in the audience that night would be so mad at you. Like, I just am trying to play something out. And they're like, we want to take photos of our kids. They'd be so
shut
mad.
These lights off. Yeah. That'd be great.
So funny. I wanted to ask you a question because you've told me before that when it comes to your photography, you are comfortable with your technical settings, and looking at your images, you can see light, and I can tell. But you said that one of your struggles is creativity. Can you talk to me a bit about that?
Yeah, so I love to get into, as part of trying to push out from sports and work on other things, taking portraits, taking editorial and environmental portraits, especially trying to light those and come up with a unique and creative idea. That's kind of where, I run into trouble posing and just coming up with an idea of what I want to see. I know what I like when I see it, but trying to come up with it and create it out of nothing is definitely one of the bigger challenges that I face.
It's like we have the exact same brain. Honestly, it's like, that's so crazy. I feel the exact same way. And I've never heard anybody else describe it like that, but that's 100% accurate. So
yeah,
you're in good company.
I'll be walking through something and I'll see like, hey, that's a great photo right there. But later, if you put me in the same spot, I wouldn't recreate it that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's mostly the posing aspect that is hard for you, or or what else does that encompass?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And because I like to think a lot of it went back to those early days on the paper. I was very much a student of the ethics side. And my goal at one point was, and I wouldn't even be opposed to it today, but to get into photojournalism more seriously. And a big part of that is not impacting the scene that's taking place in front of you. You know, you can't go to a thing and say, hey, sorry, it'd be better if your sign was turned around this way for my story. So I just got in this mindset of just take what's there and make that work. And I like to, at least that's my excuse for why I'm so bad at it today. Probably it's just something I'm just not generally very good at to begin with, but I do think that still plays a part in it. I'd rather document a thing that's already happening as opposed to trying to create something. And even when that's my intent, I still struggle with it. So I go back to my original fail-safe of giving myself an assignment and saying, okay, I'm going to go do this thing. It's for me, but here's what I want out of it. And here's, I'm going to pretend to be my own art director or editor and give myself this assignment that I want to fulfill. And I use that to try to get over that problem and say, well, now I have to come up with something. So if this were a job, if I were being paid, what would I do? What would I force myself to do to make something more creative here?
So just to be clear, you're shooting just for yourself in these cases, and you are coming up with your own self-assignment and putting yourself in a situation where you have to photograph somebody and pose them to see if you can get it to work?
In some cases, it's just for my own entertainment. And in some cases, they actually are jobs. I do work for a few local magazines, and then it's really game on.
Yeah.
Then I have to get it done. And so far, they haven't provided any negative feedback. So I guess
well, that's good. That's good.
Every time I leave anything, of course, I'm in the car on the way home. I'm like, man, I wish I would have done this, or I should have done that. Maybe I can call them when they come back. Do it again.
Most recently, can you tell me an example? Like, what's the shot that you didn't get that you wish that you did?
Oh, so I've been trying to play with like fog and haze to try and work that into some of the more, what you might call portrait within the sports world, trying to create something a little more fun and was unique. A lot more people are doing it than they used to these days. But that doesn't mean I don't want to try it. I still want to try it.
Of course.
And so far it's been a big fail because just my lack of understanding of how all that works. I had this image in my mind recently. I did a photo shoot with a guy who's really into pickleball. And I thought, I've never seen a pickleball portrait. There's plenty of tennis portraits, but I've never seen anybody do pickleball. And I tried to even look and couldn't really find anything. So let's go meet and do this. And I have this one shot in mind that I really want with the fog in the back and the light really dramatic. And I took all the stuff out there and we tried, and I discovered it was just way too windy to pull that off.
Oh no!
I forgot that wind was involved in it. So that was a big fail. But it was a good self-assignment in the sense that no one was expecting to get those photos, and it was a good push in that. Even if they had asked me for those, they wouldn't have asked me for that photo. But I still wanted to try it.
Yeah.
Even though it failed, now I've learned what I should do differently next time, which is not be outside in Kansas.
Just all of Kansas. It's just always windy.
It's constantly windy. So much you kind of tune it out until you go put a light up and it knocks your light down.
You're like, oh, that's right. There's wind here. Dang it.
You're like, oh, I forgot.
That's funny. I thought you were going to go somewhere completely different with that and say that. So you gave the dude a pickle, like just to like eat for a pickleball and like try to put the two together. But in my head, I was like, that's so on the nose. Like that would be so terrible. Like if I was the pickleball player, I'd be like, we're done. Like I'm not doing that. That's ridiculous. So
that's too creative. I haven't seen that. So that's. I got to recreate something I've seen.
Yeah, maybe that's it. It's just too creative. That's my problem. I'm so creative that I don't even know where to start. I just doubt myself the entire time. Yeah, that is not the case at all. Well, I appreciate you talking about the creativity aspect because I know that that's something that I struggle with, and especially as I kind of made that transition from understanding the technical side of photography to, well, now what's next, right? Because I didn't know. There was no sort of resources on, well, what's next after you learn the technical side of photography, unless it was very specific to a genre. And then you just kind of had to pick and pull ideas like, oh, I haven't seen that. I'm going to try that. So I know that a lot of people are going through that as well. So in your experience, because now you've been shooting for a while, I'm sure that even though it still doesn't feel perfect to you, what have you learned about posing people and making them look their best in front of the camera?
Oh yeah, it's definitely come a long way. I have all the photos I've ever shot for the most part, minus one little hard drive mishap in the early days. But
we all have one of those. We all have one of those. Yeah.
Luckily, it didn't get. Those were all terrible anyways. So I haven't worked too hard to get those back.
Perfect.
So I can go back and look at some of these, and things that in my mind were amazing are just awful. Like, I can't believe I sent some of these things out to people. Can we just pretend that never happened? You never asked me for these photos and I never gave them to you. Let's just move on.
And I'm never going to talk about them on a podcast in the future.
Right. Absolutely. Some of them were just really rough. And so I've learned, particularly, and I still kind of lean on the technical side. I go back to the rules of, like, where can I place the light so that the posing looks better, instead of just hitting them right in the face with it. Maybe move it to the side and maybe add in a second light if we're getting real crazy. Create some shape and dimension, and that takes a little of the pressure of trying to find a better pose off in some ways, because I'm not trying to make it work with what I've got. I'm just bringing extra stuff to it now. That could be, some people would look at that as a progression of skill, and in my case, I kind of think of it as a crutch.
Interesting. Your use of light, your knowledge of light, you see as a crutch because you're leaning against that rather than actually trying to have your subjects interact with them and make them pose in a certain way?
Yeah, in some cases, I find myself maybe making the image too much instead of taking what's already there and working with it through better posing, through finding the light instead of trying to just fix it. There's phenomenal natural light photographers that I watch even to this day on YouTube, and I'm like, how do you see this? How do you see that if you move somebody's arm this way, it changes the whole image? But it does. Mm-hmm. I see it and it looks amazing. And I just don't think of that on my own up front. So I don't know if any amount of watching other people do that will ever bleed through, but I keep trying to do that.
So then let me ask you a question, because once again, somehow we're the exact same person and I feel the same thing. And when I watch somebody like Jerry Guionis or Vanessa Joy pose, I'm like, how in the world did you see that? I never would have seen something like that. I never would have thought to put somebody in that situation to grab a photo like this. And yet they do, and it looks amazing. So what I think of is, immediately I think, I am not as good as them. But then the other side of the coin, I think to myself, maybe I just have a different set of skills and I'm trying to fit myself into their box rather than exploring my creative box and how I best create images. What side of that do you fall on?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think it's, at some point, it's useful to look to other photographers to see what work they're producing and compare that to your own so you can grow. I think at a little past that, it's dangerous, because you look to photographers and you compare to yourself and you think, I'm never going to get there. Jerry Guionis being one of those people. I look at his images. I've been watching this same YouTube video of his for 10 years now, and I still would not be able to do what he does. Because, I mean, there's obviously so much more that goes into it, and half of it is just the way his mind works in that situation. He's just a kind of a genius when it comes to some of those things.
And that's why it's hard, because it does come from him and the way that he sees things. How do we develop that? How do we develop that skill? And I think you're right. Like, there's a bit that we can use as a tool, but at a certain point, they are who they are and we are who we are. And I think maybe that's kind of where I'm at in my photography journey, trying to figure out, where am I? Who am I? What am I trying to say? What can I create? What makes, I don't want to say me unique, but like, where can I, like, what do I see that maybe others don't see in the same way? But all that I know is all that I know. So I don't know what other people don't know. And that's where it gets challenging. So if you ever figure out an answer to that, please let me know, because I am all ears.
Well, and it gets even more than that. It bleeds into other aspects of it as well, as like on the business end of things. I mentioned I have not made much progress in developing a business of my own, despite having the opportunity to do so many times, because every YouTube channel you watch, every person that's out there living this life says you need to do these things. You need to open your own business. You need to niche down and find that one thing that you're going to do and make money at, and then promote that one thing. First of all, I don't want to do just one thing. I want to be a generalist, but I understand the business side that makes that a challenge. But I also, maybe unpopular opinion here, but I don't want to be an entrepreneur. I don't want to run my own business. I just don't. I'd rather work for someone else in the business of photography. And I think that's another aspect of it that people get stuck on, because they think if I'm going to make money in photography, then I have to run my own business and I have to do weddings. I have to do headshots. I have to do newborns. And I'm inspired a little bit by your recent episode with Gary Hughes on that, and I assume it spoke to you as well. You highlighted this chunk in the intro, but where he says you don't have to do the things you don't want to do in order to be successful. Yeah. And so I think that's along those same lines. You see what everybody else is doing and you think, well, in order to be successful, that's what I have to do. But I would much rather, as far as career outlook goes, I would be completely happy and satisfied if I could go be a team photographer for a team that's out there, or a university photographer where I'm living in that one world and I'm able to develop images throughout the course of a couple of years and really get to know this one stadium, this one set of players. This baseball players right now are killing it, because these guys that are in the MLB, these team photographers, it's insane. They can tell you from 7:16 to 7:21, the light's going to come through this one crack in the stadium and it's going to hit the pitcher right in the face. And it's amazing what they can do because they've gotten to know that so well. And that's stuff that business application of entrepreneurship doesn't necessarily apply to all of photography. And I, going back to the original question of comparing yourselves, I think if you get too focused in on what everybody else is doing, you're going to miss your dream opportunity that's next to it, because it doesn't fit within that box. Same with images.
So what is your dream opportunity? Manifest it right now, Ryan. Let's hear it.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I would love to be, I'm surprisingly being someone that's very interested in sports photography. I don't really follow any particular teams. I'm not invested into any. I live in the Kansas City area, so I probably should mention, say that I'm a big
Don't
Chiefs
say it.
fan.
You're not allowed to say it here on the podcast. No, if you're going to say anything about the Dodgers, you're not allowed to say it. There are no teams in Kansas City. We don't approve of that. So we'll move on. So yeah, sports. Yeah, go on.
But yeah, I'm not tied to any one thing. So my dream role would be with any of these teams where I could develop those long-term relationships with the area, the players, the people, and really dive in and push into that creative aspect, whether through my own doing or by requirement. Because a lot of this hopping around between different teams and different people, you don't get that opportunity. You're just there to get the one game and then you're out.
Of course. So I'm going to push you right now, and I'm going to ask you, who do you need to contact to get an opportunity like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I spend a lot of time watching. There's a website specifically dedicated to this called Teamwork Online, where a lot of the teams will post jobs and most of the photography-related jobs pop up. There's a lot of internship roles, which my problem is with that, I've racked up too many bills.
Photography is
expensive. Some of which are photography-related.
Yeah, of course, 100%.
So I've kind of, unfortunately, locked myself into that, just being a little bit late in the game myself. If I was just coming out of college and I knew about this, I would be diving on that 100%. So just waiting, and even that's kind of an excuse, waiting for the right opportunity to show up. But just thinking about that's an excuse right there instead of making that opportunity.
It is. Yep.
I need to be reaching out locally to these folks and asking for portfolio reviews and image critiques and just making those networking connections. And even if that doesn't produce something locally, this is a fairly tight community. We all know somebody. Maybe somebody out there will help me out.
So you said that you should probably be showing your portfolio to people local to get their input. Who? Name somebody local that you are going to send your portfolio to after we hang up today.
Ooh, pressure for sure. Yeah, I would like to reach out to these local folks who are doing that job that I want to do. And in this case, those team photographers, because we're lucky where I'm at. Not everybody's going to have this opportunity, but we have some D1 schools here. We have some professional level schools, teams, because not every team's going to have a position like this. So some of them, it's just not a budgeted thing that they have. So reaching out to them may not do you any good. Mm-hmm. But reaching out to the people that are with the teams locally doing that job, I think would be the best next step as far as trying to make those connections and get those critiques and those reviews. Because I could be way off base. I could be thinking I'm doing great, and then I go to one of these guys and they're like, "Yeah, man, you're not going to make it. Like this is not for you. Sorry."
Okay, so I'm going to give you an out here, but I hope that you don't take it. Is this one of those situations where you think that it would be best to be at a game and talk to somebody in person and be like, "Hey, would you mind checking out my photos?" Or is this a situation where you think right now you are close enough with somebody that you could say, "Hey, Mark, whatever your name is, can you take a look at a few of my photos here and give your opinion?"
I think in this very specific example, and I want to clarify that, in most cases, I think that doing that would be an amazing idea. In this specific case, they're way too busy at a game to want to talk to you. So don't do that. Catch them maybe in the off season.
That is not now for baseball. It is the height of baseball.
No, baseball is ramped up, but we do have football down the street, so maybe I can go chat with them.
Football's fine. Yeah, Kansas City does have a football team. That's okay. That's fine.
Yeah, I've heard of them before.
Yeah. They got some guy who throws a ball pretty good over there. But okay, so you think that you could send somebody an email with a few of your photos?
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible. And I think particularly when they have the time, most of these teams are the ones creating these intern positions anyways. So they're always looking for new people to come on. And however they make that connection, whether that's through an application of some sort, and you might get sent that way anyways. But even being able to just go out with them, even if you're not seeking a position, to go with them for an hour and watch them before the game as they set up the remote cameras, because that's a huge part of the sports photography these days. Is you can only be one place, but you can set up 10 different remote cameras in places, and that's complicated if you don't know how to do it. So even learning that, and most importantly, just making those connections, just getting your name out there and becoming known as someone who's interested, even if you're not ready for it, maybe they can help you get ready, help me get ready.
Well, I expect to hear a follow-up within the next week of the people who you have reached out to and their responses, because I would love to hear
Hold me to it. I want you to hold me to that.
Let's see. Email. Let's see.
I need the assignment.
Yes. RyanNeedsPhotoAssignment.com. I'm going to buy that domain after this. Well, that's perfect. Yeah, honestly, I mean, I think that a lot of us could get further. I think that we're all better photographers than we think that we are. There's just a lot of self-doubt inside. And I think truly that the key to figuring out your actual skills as a photographer is to get feedback from others. Because when you have somebody else look at your photos, you know that they have experience, and it's not just like a family friend who is going to just be very easy with your photographs. It's going to be with a very defined eye, and you're going to know what you need to work on, because oftentimes there are things that you overlook that you didn't even know that you were overlooking in the first place, because again, you don't know what you don't know, and bringing that to light is super helpful. So I really hope that you do it, that you take me up on it, and I am going to email you and see what that progress is to get an answer, because I would love to hear it. And if you get some sort of internship or something, I'm going to just poop my pants, because that is going to be so awesome to hear. That is so cool. But Ryan, before, I know that we've been going for a while here, so I want to kind of start to wrap this thing up, but I do want to know more about you and your relationship to the podcast. So photography is not a new thing for you, and yet the show is called Beginner Photography Podcast. So tell me about how you found the podcast and why you decided to listen at your stage in your journey.
Yeah, I appreciate the kind words there, but I still consider myself a beginner in many ways. And even if you become good at one little slice of the pie, there's still a huge remaining piece that you don't know anything about. I love watching the posts in the group, and I'm not nearly as active as I would like to be. I'm going to blame some of that on Facebook because the news feed doesn't always feed me what I want.
I'm good with that. Let's just blame everything on Facebook. All the time. Oh my gosh.
So I'm going to blame them just a little bit. But I love watching what other people are posting and what they're doing. And it opens up my eyes to new things every day. And you've even got some fantastic sports photographers in the group that are doing things that in ways that I wouldn't do. And everything's always a learning opportunity. I don't ever want to not consider myself a beginner in this because the ceiling is just so high from where you could go. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, where does that come from? Because I understand the mindset of always trying to think like a beginner, that there's always something to learn. But believe it or not, a number of people have emailed me just within the past few months saying the name doesn't even fit anymore because it's not solely focused on beginners, and that there's only because there's great information for photographers of all levels. But a lot of people have held back from discovering the podcast simply because of the name. So, I mean, were you just looking for just photography stuff to listen to and you stumbled upon it? Or did you read the name and think, this is it? This is what I need to listen to?
Yeah, part of it is working in like a 9-to-5 type job. So I have a lot of time to sit at the desk and just plug my headphones in and listen to things. So I have the opportunity to listen to a lot of different podcasts. And in many cases, I run that list dry pretty quick early in the week, and I'm just waiting for those next episodes to hit. So some of it is, just getting out and searching for photography podcasts. There's a lot of them out there. There's not a lot of good ones in terms of fresh content, in terms of production quality even. I mean, it's a podcast. If you get on and the audio's not any good, then you're out.
It's difficult, yeah.
And even then, the content has to be there. And I really liked yours in particular because it's not trying to think of how to say this without sounding offensive in some way.
No, I'm all for it.
It's not just you getting on sharing information all the time. You're constantly bringing other people on to share their perspectives. And so that keeps it extremely fresh and I think applicable to many different levels of people because they span such a wide range of interests and genres, and they're just all over the place that really you can learn something from everybody that's on. Even if they talk about the exact same thing that you already do, they're bound to do something different, and it really helps the learning process and encourages that continual growth, I think.
I appreciate the words. I took no offense to that. I mean, that was the reason why I started the podcast, because I was like, I would just want to hear from other photographers and their perspective. So this was never about me. But when it comes, like you said, that the different genres of photography kind of makes it fresh. Do you find that if you see a child and family photographer, like you're still going to tune in with the same intensity as if you would if, say, I don't know, another sports photographer came on?
Probably more so even because it's something that it's a world I don't know anything about. And I'm always looking to improve those things. I have an almost 5-year-old nephew, and I chase him around with the camera all the time. So much so that he's totally used to it already. I take a picture and he's like, "Oh, show me." So he already knows like how to look at the back of the camera and see what I got. So even if I'm not necessarily pursuing that, it's still applicable to my life in some way. And even then, something that a concert photographer might do might directly relate to my sports photography workflow on the back end. I've stolen several things from concert photographers because they work in similar situations. Same with wedding photographers. They shoot
low light, high energy.
Exactly. Yeah. And shooting the volume, thousands and thousands of images to go through as well.
I gotcha.
Is totally different. But I still also want to hear from the people doing astrophotography because I've tried that a few times and I'm terrible at it.
It's hard. It is so hard. Yeah, it is. I feel like the composition part for me is difficult.
That got to me. You know?
That
in the middle of where you're the only light for 10 miles, and they're like, hey, there's a guy over here that has a light.
Let's all go to him. Yeah. Let's see if we bite him, maybe the light will get brighter.
I did that one time and I was like, yeah, I'm done. That was it.
Yeah, that's it. That's enough. We're done here. Then I got to ask, I'll put you on the spot again. Was there a standout episode of the podcast for you? One that just, you were like, dang, this was unexpectedly good or applicable to me?
I like so many of them, and I've listened to so many of them that I've probably already forgot quite a few and need to re-listen to them. I think the one that comes to mind, and I mentioned him earlier, is the episode with Gary Hughes. Mm-hmm. Not even from an aspect relating to photography, but just general inspiration and motivation. I think that guy could motivate just about anybody to do anything. If he wasn't doing photography, I think he should pick that up.
Could run for president.
Yeah, no kidding. That one, just a lot of encouraging words and focusing on that freedom to do what you want to do what makes you happy, and you don't have to do all those other things just because people say that that's an expectation that you need to meet.
Right.
I think that's the part that really stood out.
Well, good. Okay, cool. I appreciate you sharing that. Hopefully somebody's listening and they decide to give it a listen as well. If maybe they're new to the podcast or they're just looking for something to check out, it's always good to have a solid recommendation. So I really appreciate that. But now that we are at the end of our time, I got to ask, I know people are thinking, this dude's shooting sports, he's shooting like editorial stuff, all sorts of stuff. Obviously you're in the group, but where can we find more of your images online and follow you along?
I try, I'm very bad at it, but I try to keep up with Instagram as much as possible. Just Ryan Coody Photo is the main one that I'm posting on these days. I'm definitely working on being better about that. I get too hung up on what the algorithm might want instead of just sharing what I like.
Oh no, you've already lost when you're always thinking about the algorithm right there. But you have a website as well where you definitely post some of your favorite photos, right?
Yes, and that's just ryancoody.com.
My big 3 takeaways from what Ryan shared with us today was, 1, just how much learning to shoot in manual mode opened up doors for him, both creatively and as a profession. 2 was just the importance of light and how ISO performance is not a substitute for great quality of light. And lastly, just Ryan's pursuit to continuously learn and improve and honestly be uncomfortable, as he said, when learning something new. That is so great and honestly something that I could absolutely do more of. Now, remember, this Community Spotlight series is all about you and the supportive Beginner Photography Podcast community. So if you would like to be part of this supportive community, we would love to have you. You can find a direct link to the group in the show notes of this episode or by heading over to beginnerphotopod.com/group. Again, beginnerphotopod.com/group. Thank you so much for listening into today's episode of the podcast. And remember, the more that you shoot today, the better of a photographer you will be tomorrow. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.